Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the NARM Training Institute. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. Hi, Transforming Trauma listeners. We're thrilled to share with you that the new NARM book will be available on audiobook on November 8th, 2022. The Practical Guide for Healing Developmental Trauma using the Neuroaffective Relational Model to address adverse childhood experiences and resolve complex trauma audiobook will be read by the authors, our very own NARM creator, Dr. Lawrence Heller, and senior trainer, Brad Kammer. This book is designed to promote personal and collective change. The intention is to make NARM accessible for anyone working or dealing with complex trauma. Using therapeutic examples and helpful exercises, Brad and Laurie demonstrate how NARM can serve as a catalyst to promote healing and post-traumatic growth. Whether you are a mental health or other helping professional, or simply interested in personal growth, we hope you will find this book useful in your professional work and personal healing. The Practical Guide for Healing Developmental Trauma book is now available on Amazon and other online book retailers, and the audiobook will be available to order November 8th on Audible and other audiobook services. Please visit www.narmtraining.com/books to stay up to date on the latest news. Bill Lokey is most renowned as a husband to Laurie, a father and grandfather. He served as senior clinical director at Onsite for 10 years, where he supervised over 70 therapists throughout the U.S., trained professionals in experiential therapy, and designed programs that were attended by people from all over the world. Bill has given presentations about trauma, rising through adversity, overcoming codependency, connection in relationships, the impact of the self-protective culture in your workplace, burnout in helping professionals, sexual intimacy in relationships, and others. Along with his wife, Laurie, Bill has conducted engaging experiential workshops for leadership of churches and organizations to repair their culture and to strengthen their trust, along with marriage workshops for groups and couples intensives. Last year, Bill was given a terminal cancer diagnosis. Not to be deterred in his zest for learning and living life to its fullest, Bill and Laurie signed up for the NARM training after hearing positive things from their friends. Bill's presence, playfulness, and heart touched the group. Lead trainer Brad Kammer and Bill spent time getting to know each other, and Brad was so moved and inspired by Bill's journey that he invited Bill to share with our Transforming Trauma community.
Hey, Transforming Trauma listeners. This is Brad Kammer. I'm the training director and senior trainer of the NARM Training Institute, as well as the producer of this podcast. I feel so grateful to be part of this international NARM community. It allows me to connect with so many incredible, heartful people that are doing such inspiring healing work around the world. I built many great connections and am so appreciative of each one. One of the hardest things for me in life is dealing with loss. And our guest for this episode, my friend, colleague, and member of our NARM community, Bill Lokey, will be speaking about how he is handling loss and facing death. Bill inspired me right away when I met him in Austin with his wife Laurie back in May of this year. Last year, in 2021, Bill received a terminal cancer diagnosis and was told to say his goodbyes because the doctor said he had a very short time left to live. Now here Bill was over 6 months later as a student in my trauma training. He said that he and Laurie decided that they would live each day that they could doing what they really wanted to do, and that both of them had heard such great things about NARM that they wanted to learn NARM. I feel so grateful to have been part of his time over this past year and have appreciated our engaging around learning, healing, and friendship as we have mutual friends back in Nashville. Part of healing is learning to deal with loss and death. So as I was thinking about Bill's health, and after I heard that he wouldn't be able to continue coming to Austin to learn with us, I wasn't ready to say goodbye. Not just yet. So I asked him if he wanted to talk together with me as a podcast episode to capture where he was at in this last stage of his life journey. This episode is a recording of this discussion. I hope there may be more conversations in the future with Bill. And in the meantime, I hope you all enjoy our conversation. All right, welcome, Bill. What a pleasure to have you on Transforming Trauma.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brad. It's an honor to be on here with you.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to our conversation. We've met in a NARM training, and you have a very interesting background that I'm really interested to learn more about because we haven't had a chance to talk about that too much. And you're also at a really interesting phase of your life and what you're dealing with that I hope that you'll be able to share a little bit with us too. And
Yeah, be glad to.
yeah, and being part of our community, holding you with us and us with you as we're moving through this together.
Yeah, thank you. It has been a really interesting time in my life. So be glad to share what I can.
Great. Well, maybe the place we can start is the place we usually like to start in NARM, which is, if there was something that listeners could get out of our time here together, what would you hope they take away from our meeting here?
First of all, let me know this is mainly the NARM community
Yeah, generally.
generally. Okay.
Yeah.
So what could they look forward to?
Yeah.
Oh, boy. I guess I would say many of the things that make us really human beyond the NARM community, that when we're talking about being really showing up in NARM language, the 50-50, I guess it's more about that's the part of life that I've found and learned a lot about in the last 4.5 years, even though, at my age, I've learned a lot about that already. But I'd say it's things that would be helpful maybe in looking at how do they want to really live their life intentionally rather than it happening to them.
Great. Well, there's so much in there already of what you shared that resonates for NARM. And the other thing that came to mind, I was looking at you and Laurie's website, and the first words on your website, I wrote them down. It says, "Awaken to truth and freedom."
Yeah.
And it seems very resonant with what you're sharing and your intention for our conversation here.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it was funny with one of those things on the website where I gotten some help with a couple of people with the copy on there, and it just wasn't ringing right. I didn't want it to sound like so many of the other websites or so many of
Mm,
their things that people say when they're therapists or in the helping professions. Not that what they're saying is bad. I wanted it to fit us. And so I went back and tried to really craft it to say what it is I meant to say. And so even that statement isn't just about a little slogan, but it was intentional about, in truth, if I can get to the place of being truthful, then I really do get a sense of freedom, because I lived a lot of years earlier in my life where I was so scared and so full of shame that I didn't want anybody to see the true me.
mm,
And so while I made a good number of friends and seemed really, really happy, there was a complete lack of freedom, because it was all about how do I show up so that people are going to accept me. And man, that was tough. And it didn't go particularly well either.
Yeah, sometimes in the short run, it feels like it's going well, but long term, we realize
Yeah.
it's not going so well. It's not sustainable. Yeah. So maybe, Bill, this is a good place for us to give us a little bit of your background and where you come from and how you got into this field and what you've been doing in your career.
Yeah. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, born and raised there, and lived there most of my life. Live in Spring Hill, which is just a little south. I became a professional photographer, and then finally wound up in a commercial photography role at the largest advertising agency in Nashville many years ago, and was there for a number of years. And I enjoyed the craft. I loved the craft of photography, and wound up learning so many things using it in so many ways. But I kept having this longing inside that was like, God, I really want to do something that's worth more than making people, basically boiling it down, making people want to buy something they don't necessarily need. And so I went to the funeral of a colleague one day, or colleague friend one day, who died suddenly from a brain aneurysm. And when I was at his funeral at our church, a few of his clients got up and spoke about what his life had meant for them. And man, it was like somebody switched on a light switch. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to partner with people in places in their life and help them walk through that. And then I was like, oh crap, that means I got to go back to school. And I was like, oh, what does that mean? And so I did that while I worked full time, did part-time school. But going through that process, was slowly and a little bit at a time, intentionally becoming what it was that I wanted to do. And then in the process of going to school and then getting your continuing credits afterwards, I kept being gravitating, drawn towards trauma. And I was like, this is interesting because I don't have any trauma in my life, of course, until finally that bucket, the bottom broke loose, and I realized
Yeah.
that I had experienced trauma in my life. And so I began going through school, also began doing really my own work, which was probably what happens to a lot of people that go to school for therapy because they're basically going to heal themselves anyway.
Sure.
And so I found myself going through a number of things. Some of it was personal crisis, some of it was huge upheaval and change in my life. But I began to find that as I did my own work, I found that this became so real because I saw how scared I was in the therapist's office and how scared I was to show up in real life as a real person with my real truth and not pretending. And I just remember going, gosh, if I feel this way, I guess these people that are starting to come to me are feeling this way. And so for me, becoming a therapist was not just a job change, it was a true awakening. It allowed me to open the doors to see what it was that I needed to do and beginning to do that work, which I did off and on. And then finding that as I began to do more and more of that healing work, I found that I was literally able to show up, to be real, to be honest with myself, because I believe you can be honest with other people only when you're honest with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to find that I was able to love much, much better. I was able to be more intimate. I was able to, I think, have friends that were really true, kind of equal friends rather than always kind of putting myself one step below or one step above to try to have some sort of security in that. And so then I began doing therapy, with individual clients, worked at a counseling agency for a number of years, and then worked at a treatment center for several years, and then was the senior clinical director out at a place called Onsite in Middle Tennessee for kind of group work, and was there for 10 years, and then retired from there 3 years ago, I think it was, and partly because of what we'll talk about in a little bit, but with some health issues that I ran into. And then during that time, I began to do the therapy work with my wife, who is also a therapist. And we began to find this great working together thing where we came from our different perspectives, but worked with couples and individuals and just found ourselves loving to do that work together. And so that's what we've been doing now for the last 3.5 years. And I just absolutely love getting to do that, which I know working with a spouse can be like walking through a minefield, but just so happens that it works really, really well for us. And then we also have a little bit of a different perspective in the fact that I got divorced a number of years ago. And so she and I have been married, my present wife, Laurie, and I now have been married for 15 years. And so we kind of did a lot of our own work
Mm.
and our own recovery work while we were married. So I think that helped us a lot in being able to then work together with other people. And so it kind of keeps our relationship clean because we can't fake stuff and then work with people. We got to keep our own lives consistently in our own recovery and clean with each other. And that's been a blessing.
Yeah.
So there's a fast speed motion of a lot of it.
It all sounds wonderful. What I'm drawn to most is, how did Laurie come into your life? Where did you connect with Laurie?
Well, we met as she was going to school, we met in this field of her becoming a therapist. I was in the midst of kind of going through the divorce as we began to talk and we began to see some differences and some similarities. It's kind of interesting. We both found ourselves really drawn in our stories that we thought But even though we were doing our own recovery, I saw some things in her that was like, since I was kind of had the rescuer mentality that I grew up with,
Hmm.
that was like, oh, this will be great. I've got a place or someone I can really love and rescue and save. And she was, I think, initially feeling like, oh, this is going to really feel great and feel loved. And then we both, of course, hit our own recovery and health and saw this doesn't work. This doesn't work at all. And so we almost really broke it off until she went to actually a workshop, came back and said, can I share with you some of the things I've learned about what seems like an addictive cycle in our relationship?
Mm.
And I was like, yeah. And I thought, what I didn't say was yes, as long as it's not my fault. And so I said, yeah, I started listening to her and I was like, oh my gosh, how is this possible that this is a thing that's been going on for hundreds of years in people's relationships? And I didn't know this and I didn't see it in me.
Mm.
And then I began to see stuff as we began to date and be with each other more. I began to see things, and she would sometimes say something that was the same thing that my previous wife had said. And I was like, wait a minute, is it possible that that was true about me, all these years, and I didn't see it? And so it really helped to bring some things to life. But so as we got together as a couple, it did help feel very loving. We were both verbal in that. We let each other see that we cared and loved each other. We had a blended family then because I have 3 boys and she has 2 girls. As they began to have children, we now have 9 grandchildren together,
Wow. Wow.
which is wonderful. But we really had to go back to some of our individual recovery work in the beginning of the relationship, very important and very powerfully. And one of the things that we also did in our beliefs was that our belief is in God. And so in our belief in there, it's that Laurie can't fix me. She can't fill me, nor can I her. And so there would be times that she would have to remind me, is like, look, I can't be that for you. You got to go talk to God about this for a while. And it would first make me mad. And then I would be like, gosh, she's right. And then I would spend some time with God and get filled up kind of again spiritually and emotionally. And then I realized, oh, this is what I've got to bring to her, is now what's gotten filled up in me. But if I keep pulling on her to do that for me, we're just going to be right back in the same messes, and we've created another bad relationship. So I would say over the last a little over 15 years, in our case, we have actually gotten better and better and better and better in the relationship, because we have seen what it was like to not put that on each other,
Mm.
but instead to bring who we are to each other, even when we get triggered, because we're both trauma survivors. And then know that we've got to depend on our God to kind of do that really strong work in us while we do that as a partnership. It just made all the difference in the world for us.
Yeah.
And then our grandchildren now, they never knew. I mean, they know we're both divorced, but they never knew anything different. So we get to have 9 grandkids that, know us as at least, 2 of the grandparents in the set. And we just, we have a blast with them. And Laurie and I do too. We've really had a lot of adventures together.
Hmm. Yeah, so it sounds like you've really used the crucible of the relationship to work through these old patterns that you were describing before about finding your real self, not having to adapt or adjust yourself to stay in connection, and yeah, really making that come alive in your relationship.
Yeah. Like when early on in our relationship and our marriage, we had gotten back from a concert, and I don't even remember what it was that happened, but we were in this argument that we got into. And literally, I kept believing every moment as we argued that any moment she was going to see, oh, that's where you're right and that's where I'm wrong. I literally believed that. And I don't know how many people have actually convinced their partner that they were right and the other one was wrong. I don't know if that's ever worked. But finally, there was literally this moment when she said, you seem like you turn on me and make me be the one that feels like it's about me, when we started this off about you. And I remember thinking, gosh, that was said in my first marriage. Is this possible true? And literally feeling the reality go and going, oh my gosh, is it true that I'm the one that's making the big deal out of this rather than you? And I saw that for the first time and I was just blown away. And those are the kind of freedoms that I think that come to us when we're really willing to be honest and we're really seeking what the truth is rather than how do I just defend myself and make it so that I don't wind up being the guilty one or the one that gets blamed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so much of what you're talking about is, it falls within this category of codependence and
Yeah.
trying to, show up really in your authenticity in your relationship. And I think it's such an inspiration for so many people who are really struggling in quiet desperation within relationships that
Oh, yeah.
they don't feel like they can be their full self, or they're disappointed in the connection that they have with their partner. And so I love that, you're teaching and you're doing all these workshops with couples or therapy with couples, and yet you're also living this in a really honest way in yourself and your relationship.
Well, I think that's one of the draws is that when people see us, when we either do a training or a workshop or a therapy with a couple, they'll often say, what you taught was really good, but the thing we loved the most was seeing you two together.
Mm,
Because one of the things we love talking about is the impact of trauma on each of us, whether it be a developmental trauma or, as I like to call it, the bear chasing you in the woods trauma. But when we get on that place of the fight, flight, or freeze, or at least in that limbic part of our brain where we want to survive, I literally am seeing my spouse in that moment as the enemy.
yeah.
They are doing this to me. And what we say is oftentimes what we say inside of ourselves, and we don't mean it rationally, but I'm going to kill you before you kill me
Yeah.
because it's all about survival. And when we get there and then we live years in that happening over and over and over again of just little arguments or big arguments, and we keep having evidence, we think, that proves that they are the enemy, after a while, we truly believe it.
Yeah.
And so that's why then a person or a couple goes to do therapy with someone and they learn new techniques, they new listening skills, communication skills. It doesn't go stay anywhere because I'm still deep down inside going, yeah, but I'm sleeping with the enemy.
Mm,
And when they can begin to find and see themselves and see the heart of the other person, maybe the first time in a very long time, we'll oftentimes hear some statement or look that says, ah, there you are. I haven't seen you in years. And even though the problem hasn't been worked out yet, now there's begin this longing for, I think I'd like to work this out with you
mm.
because I haven't seen this you in a really long time. And it begins to shift when I can get off of that survival place. But boy, that is so key.
Hmm. You've given us a few hints about what's helped you to kind of shift that survival piece for you. You've talked about your relationship to God. You've talked about your own therapy, talked about the courage of bringing this into your relationship. Is there anything else that you feel like has helped you to shift some of these deep survival patterns?
Good question. I think it started with some help up front, being really honest.
Mm,
I think that was so key because I was oftentimes in my life had been someone that was at least a person that was involved in leadership of one thing or another. And so the more I felt like some people looked up to me or saw me in a place of being seen that way, the more invested I was in looking okay. The more invested I was in being that person.
mm,
I remember sitting with a therapist in the very beginning of this, and he asked me, I was going through the divorce, but I was already kind of talking with someone in a relationship just to get those emotional needs. And he said, I really recommend that you not do that for a while, for maybe a year. I'd like to ask you to stop that for a while we work together. And I remember literally sitting there thinking, okay, I can do what I always do, which is just to go, sure, and not about to.
mhm.
And I sat there and went, oh gosh, what would it feel like to be honest? And I looked at him and I said, would you still be willing to work with me if I said, I don't know that I can or if I want to? And he said, sure. And I just remember going, what? You would actually stay working with me if I was really honest and transparent? And he said, yeah. And I just remember it blew me away. I was like, how is that possible? And so slowly, I began to find several men that I met with. One was a men's group, other were a couple of men friends that I became really close to. And we just became really real and honest, truthful with each other. And for a while, it was just like, I don't know if I'm going to be accepted, but finding that truthful friendship was really more around going, yeah, me too, maybe not the same specifics, but similar. And I began to find that something inside of me that had been so terrified kept just going, I've got a little bit more room to breathe, and a little bit more room to breathe. And as that happened for me, I think it really set the stage so that as I began to do trauma work, or I began to do some of those other things that I think were very, very valuable, I first believed that there were a few people out there that were going to stand with me and that I could breathe and I could be real.
Mm.
And then that transferred in my relationship with Laurie, where then for us, we could start really being real and truthful, not just truthful to be critical, but it was truthful about, sometimes it's like, here's the story I'm making up in my head, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I want to check it out. And a number of variations of that. And I think, at least that's one of the first things that pops in my mind when you say that. And that's why for the training in NARM around the 50-50, actually, while it's simple, it just kind of blew me away at first. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
what do you mean I'm supposed to be thinking about where I am? I thought I was just supposed to just see where everybody else was, and be with them. And to be aware that I'm aware of you and I'm aware of me is really intimacy.
Yeah.
It's very much of what marriage or other kind of relationships are, but it gave me more of the ability to step into that, to go, oh yeah, this is what living looks like, instead of it being about a role, that this is being real. I don't take that and then share something that's inappropriate with the client because I'm
Yeah.
struggling with that
Yeah.
that day. But then I know to go take that someplace else that is appropriate.
Mm-hmm. What I really heard in that there was two steps to that process with the therapist. You having really trust in yourself and showing up for yourself to be real because you had no idea how the therapist was going to respond.
Yeah,
And then the therapist responding in a way that might have been different than some people in the past have responded to you. So
yeah,
there's two parts to it, and both seem very important as part of the relational kind of framework that you and I are really interested in the work we do.
yeah,
Yeah, and it sounds like you really, at some point in your life, told it about this funeral that you went to, but at some point in your life, you really made this commitment to try to work with the obstacles in the way of you living your life as authentically as possible.
yeah. Because the way I was going, it still looked good, but I was headed, downhill more and more it finally did kind of explode, going through divorce, going through hurting some people, but it could have exploded, a lot deeper, a lot wider if I had continued in that direction. And one of the things I loved was when I was clinical director out at Onsite, this guy came up to me after one of the presentations, because every morning I would lead a presentation before they would go into their groups. And he came up to me and he said, one of the things I love about this is it works. And I said, what do you mean? He said, basically, this has worked for you. He said, I'm hearing your stories. And he said, if you can screw up as much as you have and you turned out okay, there's hope for me. And I was like, great. I said, that's what I mean. And I love the fact that now I actually really enjoy being able to share the stories and to go, yeah, this is where life really sucked. And this was where it was hard. And these are the things that I did as well that really hurt me and other people. But here are some things that I was able to do differently, and that it's really shifted and changed things in my life. And I think that's where a lot of people are just longing to hear is that there's not just an expert out there that's got the answers, but there's someone that has maybe some answers who's already been where they've been. And that's what I think people just long for.
Oh, yes. And, this brings me to why I was so excited to have this conversation with you. And it's aligned also with your intention for our conversation to kind of help listeners maybe with a little hope around how to live life more intentionally. But this is a great story about that person that came up to you and said, like, wow, you've done it. That helps me. Because when I first met you, I don't remember if it was you or Laurie who told me this, but that you're going through some
Yeah.
really big health issues, and that you and Laurie have made the choice to just live day by day to the fullest extent possible. And that was very inspiring for me. I think, as a culture, we're pretty afraid of health issues and death specifically. And I just wanted to have this conversation with you because of how inspired I've been learning about you and
Thank you.
how you've been living this phase of your life, and whatever you'd like to share with us about that, I'd love to hear.
Well, thank you. Yeah, January the 4th, 2018. I have that ingrained in my mind as the day I got the news that I had prostate cancer. And my doctor had said, and again, trying to shorten this, but doctor had said, well, your PSA, which is a blood marker that can indicate prostate cancer, he said there's other reasons it can rise, or even if you do have prostate cancer, it's often a very slow growing cancer. So it doesn't necessarily mean terrible things. And when I went back in his office, he was like, yeah, you do have prostate cancer. And I'm really sorry. This is the fastest kind of cancer there is, fastest growing. So, long story short, I decided to go to MD Anderson in Houston, Texas for a while for treatment for probably about 4 years, 3.5 to 4 of those years, which they have a great facility, great doctors, and just kept going from one treatment to the next, one clinical trial to the next. I've gone through 3 chemotherapies. And finally, the traveling just got to me so much that I'm seeing now. I chose an oncologist here near Nashville, whom I also love. He's a great oncologist. But there was this thing that happened last October, just this past October, that really made a shift. I mean, you do all that stuff of you learn about this and how do you begin to prepare for that and how do you begin to think and going through the shock and all those things. And that could be a longer conversation. But this past October was one of the last times I'd seen that doctor in Houston. And he had said, we've pretty much run through all of our medications. We pretty much run through everything, and your cancer just keeps coming back stronger because it had metastasized now from prostate cancer. We did surgery first, lots of stuff. So it's metastasized to the bone. So it's kind of all in my bones. And he said, if we don't do anything at all, you've got about 3 to 6 months left to live. And that was last October. He said, I want to start you on a really aggressive chemotherapy, actually 2 of them. He said, if we do that, that may prolong it. But he said, I think you need to let your kids know this will probably be your last Christmas with them. Well, like, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
And so came home and actually we went to our daughters first in Austin, Texas, and I called each of my boys and then talked to each of the kids. Those were very hard conversations. And I found that, basically preparing them for this to be my last year. Then this thing happened in January that there was a conversation that one of the kids had with Laurie, and they were talking about a trip upcoming this year in 2022, as if I wasn't going to be there on the trip. And I remember kind of getting my feelings hurt. It was kind of like, you're talking over me and I'm sitting right here. And they left, and I first told Laurie, I was like, well, that kind of didn't sit right. And then I thought, wait a minute, they're doing exactly what I prepared them to do. They're living life preparing for me not to be in their lives anymore. And I was like, I don't like this. And so the next day, I heard a couple of other things. Actually, we listened to a Bible study that we listen to often from a person. And something just hit me, and it was like, wait a minute. I don't want to be about preparing to die. I want to be about preparing to live. My set of beliefs say that I'll also get to be a part of an eternal life. And I'm going, so then I'm going to live. I just want to be about preparing to live, whether it's this life or the next. But what I found was happening, and this is something I do want everybody, regardless of beliefs, to really think about for their life, regardless if you have cancer or not, is that I had taken that news, had prepared kind of my own heart and everybody else, and then I was basically sitting on the shelf, kind of waiting to die.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that was a really pitiful place to be. And I realized I don't want to stay here. I want to live. I want to prepare to live. I want to make plans. If we don't get to do the plans, we don't get to do the plans. And what I began to find is that not only did I feel different, it doesn't mean that I won't die any less soon.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that I'm not going to physically still go through the same things. But I began to find that automatically my kids began to include me back in on plans and back in the conversation. And there was a different dynamic. And I began to feel kind of differently inside. And I felt like I had purpose again. Literally, one of the things was we had been talking with a couple of friends that were in the NARM training. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do this because this NARM training is a long time. And I don't know if I want to live my last year, go into 4 different trainings. And then one of the things that shifted was, yeah, I want to do the things that I believe in, that I still have passion for, that I feel are important. And then when I get to the place, and I want to make sure and put the and making sure that I plan still more time with my kids and my grandkids, because that's really important. And then when things happen or get to a place where I can't, then I won't.
Mm-hmm.
The question I would say for others who don't have cancer is to also look at what is it you've put on a shelf that you've said, that's impossible for me.
Mm.
I give up on that. I can't do that. I failed at it. Or I got embarrassed, or I tried and it didn't go well for me. And so this just isn't for me, even though I really long for it and I wish. And we've stuck some longing on a shelf. And I would say, what is it that you've done that with? And instead, what would it mean to take that down off the shelf and to go, all right, then I'm going to try to start doing the next step towards that. And then if I get blocked, I'll get blocked.
Yeah.
But otherwise, the only thing that's blocking me right now is me sitting on this dadgum shelf. And it really shifted things for me. And some days are great and I feel good and I feel like doing things. And then, as you may have seen,
Mm-hmm.
this last training last week, there are some days that I feel so much fatigue or pain
Mm-hmm.
that I can't. And there were a couple of days I couldn't show up.
Mm-hmm.
And while that hurts or while there's angst in it, I love the fact that I'm living and I'm not just dying.
Yeah. Wow. I think there's that great line from Shawshank Redemption
Yeah.
that's, yeah, if you're not busy living, you're busy dying. And I love that. What I'm really struck by just with you personally, Bill, is just your radical longing that's led to this radical living. And again, just what an inspiration. And you're right. It's not just for people that are sick or,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, just really how do we live intentionally each day because it goes by quick. And if we're not living it intentionally, then there's a lot of potential for us to.
Yeah. And the question I found was sounded so simple, and yet I think it's profound, is we first find as we're living this life, we often think about, well, I'm kind of scared of dying. But what I find that actually most people are scared of living
Yeah.
because it's either about failure or it's about what if I can't, or what if I can't do this, or whatever that is. And so we find some way of blaming it on someone else or upon my circumstances or whatever that is. And I agree, there are certain circumstances, man, they suck. And if anybody that's listening to this has cancer or some other type of long-term illness, or even an illness or some situation that's painful, I'm not making light of it at all. It really is no fun at all. But if to just go there and to say, I can't because of, what I've been finding is it just doesn't work that way. There are some days that I literally can't, but there are other days that I can for a couple hours.
Mhm.
And I find it fulfilling. I find it makes me happier. I find it is something that I stay, even in my relationship with Laurie, we can laugh about this together and we cry together.
Mhm.
And it's not like we did it a couple of times and now it's the unspeakable. It's like, no, we talk about it periodically and sometimes very often. And sometimes we still cry over the loss of what we anticipate, but then we can make a joke about something with it and laugh and know that that's a part of staying in intimacy. And one of the things that's, I guess, unfortunate is that when you have a relationship where you really feel intimate with someone, is that if I do die early, man, she's going to go through a ton of pain. And it's one of the things that I worry about some and struggle with. But I know she's going to be okay. But that doesn't take away also the real pain that's there for her. And so we both bear our own pain in this thing, and we both have to choose how we're going to live. And I just love doing that on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm deeply touched, by getting to share this time with you in the space with you. And,
Oh, yeah.
I felt all the wisdom coming off of you, but we haven't had a chance to slow down and really kind of
Yeah.
connect
Yeah.
one on one. But I'm just really, again, just admire and inspired by you and Laurie's relationship and your commitment to
Mm.
this intentionality and living. And I don't know, I just wondered if there was anything more that you wanted to share that was left over for you.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Ah, that's such a big question.
Yeah, take your time.
It broadens out so far. Wow. It's funny. I was thinking we would probably get to that question, and I'm finding myself struggling with what that is because there's a number of things.
Mm,
And I don't know why, but I feel like myself drawn a little bit to say this. And this isn't the thing to everybody, but maybe something will come from it. But two friends were over this morning meeting with Laurie and I. They're both going through NARM, and we have been struck by, I don't know if that's where you started in your personality, but struck by who you are. And every time you teach, it keeps making us feel like, wow, that feels so safe. That's one of the things I love about NARM, but I think it's one of the things I love, maybe I'm drawn to, is that I'm drawn to people who are not feeling okay because everything has worked out okay, or at least they say it has. But I'm drawn to the integrity of people who are willing to go, I have hurt or I am hurting and I have done some wrong things and I've done some right things. But what I'm learning is a way of living that feels loving. And that has felt really true about you, Brad, that when, at least from our teaching, that there was this place where we all kind of said we were really drawn to that. And I think that's maybe one of the things today is for me is saying there are some pathways and roads that help lead us to caring about other people while also caring about ourselves rather than just faking it. And I'm finding myself continuing to be drawn to being with people like that because it's just like, I can feel like I can breathe.
mm,
And I think one of the things we need so much, and for crying out loud, I don't know for what reason, but it seems like so many things are divided these days in the world that instead of being able to be divided, the coming together around our humanity and
yeah.
coming together about the pains and really seeing how the similarities drive the things that we've been trying to be to get safe, with. But it's those things that drive our fears that really, if we share those with each other, I think we find that the fear goes down and the love for each other can actually increase. And so I hate to make like a just this panacea statement of love or whatever, but it's one of the things that I find is really important in my life, is because to live defensively, to live secretly is such a lonely place to be. Boy, it didn't work for me. I've never known anybody it's really worked for. And probably after we get off of this call, I'll think of oh man, I wish I had said that.
The nugget of wisdom.
Yeah, the great nugget of wisdom.
Yeah, you've shared so much. I mean, what I really
There is
yeah,
one other the thing that
yes,
goes
please.
with that. Yeah, it did occur to me. One of the things remember when I was writing some of the things about cancer was, and I liked this statement, which is, don't keep carrying keys to doors where you no longer live,
Mm.
which is the expectation that my life needs to be like it was, that my health was good, I want it to stay that way, or my kids were this way and I want them to stay this way, or whatever. But we keep oftentimes carrying the keys, thinking we'll finally find that door again, that it opens. And when we do, we miss out on the gifts that we're actually in touch with now that we can't see if we aren't willing to live where we live. And that is something that is very, very meaningful to me, because it's in that role of acceptance of my life. And I remember learning years ago in recovery, of 12-step recovery, that expectations were premeditated resentment. And that's what that is for me, is that keep wanting to carry that set of keys, that just in case I'll find the old door again, that my life will work, is really a step backwards. And it's, how do I accept what's happened to me and actually learn from it and actually grow from it, would be one of the things I would love to share. So thanks for giving me enough time to finally remember that one.
No, that's great. I'm here for more if you got more, but truth and freedom, and yeah. The thing that I'm really taking from all of this though is just your heart, and I think that's why I was so attracted to you.
Oh, thank you.
Not just the way that you chose to live this part of your life, but also just, what emanates off of you. And
Mm.
one of my favorite sayings is, it takes one to know one. So I appreciate what you were sharing about me, but I also think that that's what I appreciate about you as well.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I'm just so deeply grateful that you and Laurie trusted in your friends and came to study in our community and connect with us. And
Yeah.
I'm so happy that you're both part of our community, and we'll see where this goes moving forward.
Yep.
Been an honor to be connected with you.
Thank you, Brad. I appreciate it very much. Appreciate you taking the time to do this with me today.
Yeah. Bill, before we wrap up, if people want to learn more about you or the work that you and Laurie do, anywhere to invite them to learn more?
Well, we do have a website. It's not a real fancy one, but it's Bill and Laurie, Laurie, Bill and Laurie Lokey, Lokey. So the whole thing is Bill and Laurie Lokey at gmail.com. And we've got a website that we do have a few teaching videos on there that are free. We aren't selling anything on there.
Mhm.
Tells a little bit about us. And we do in these 3-day intensives that we mostly do together, but she does some on her own, which she is an incredible therapist. I always say she's the best therapist I've ever met, but that's, of course, being her husband, nobody listens to me. But she really is an amazing therapist. And that just says a little bit about us. And yeah, if there's any desire, that's one place.
Have you done some writing? You mentioned some writing.
Oh man, I have done little bits and spurts of writing. I have tried, actually, one of my intentions was to write something that might become a book. And then I don't know, I just kept running into some of the energy level problems with,
Hmm.
I go through then another round of chemotherapy. And so I've had a couple of friends tell me about a couple of softwares that you could just do it verbally,
Hmm.
and then it, puts it in writing. And I haven't done a very good job of following all that because I'm not a super high tech person. And I'm just kind of like, oh, I'm not sure how to do that. So
Hmm.
I would love to do some more writing into something like that, whether it be a book or something that might be useful to some people. But I'm not sure, with the energy flow that goes up and down, how to do that the best. So maybe we'll find out a good way of doing that.
Hmm.
One of the things I know several people have told me, that my way of saying it is one of the things that they like. So to do it conversationally and to record that might be the best way for me. But again, I haven't
Hmm.
exactly learned how to do that. So
Well, maybe this is a follow-up conversations for us
Yeah,
because there's a recording and transcript that gets made out of this. So maybe we can continue. And
that'd be fun.
yeah, that would be fun. There'd be a lot more for us to explore together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd be glad to. I'd love to do that.
Well, Bill, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time
You're welcome.
and your heart and the truth that you're sharing with us, and look forward to more connection.
Thanks, Brad. Me too. I do too.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more about our guest and their work, check the show notes or visit us at narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. The practical guide for healing developmental trauma using the neuroaffective relational model to address adverse childhood experiences and resolve complex trauma audiobook will be available on November 8th, 2022. This book is designed to promote personal and collective change. The intention is to make NARM accessible for anyone working or dealing with complex trauma. Whether you are a mental health or other helping professional, or simply interested in personal growth, we hope you will find this book useful in your professional work and personal healing. The Practical Guide for Healing Developmental Trauma book is now available on Amazon and other online book retailers, and the audiobook will be available to order November 8th on Audible and other audiobook services. Please visit www.narmtraining.com/books to stay up to date on the latest news. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community, connection with you, and changing the world by transforming trauma.